So how to find the greatest common factor? Let's look at these example problems, and then we'll by the end, hopefully everybody knows how to find the greatest common factors of a set of numbers or terms here. So the greatest common factor is the term that you can divide this, for example, this 3x squared by, and still get a whole number and no variables in the denominator. Because if we get a fraction, so I guess we can generalize that and as us not getting a fraction. So like what terms, what numbers, or what variables can we divide 3x squared by and not get a fraction? So let's look at that. One way to do it is to find all the factors of 3 and all the factors of 9 so that we can find the factor, the greatest factor, the largest factor that both the 3 and the 9 are divisible by, and us not end up with a fraction. So the factors of 3 are 3 and 1. Every single number has a factor of 1, so we don't include it whenever we're trying to find out the greatest common factor. So we only divide 3 by 3 because you get a whole number, you don't get a fraction. So that would be the only factor of 3. Now let's look at the variable here. So that variable has two factors. They're x and x. So what's going to be the factors for x? The x squared, x and x. That's it. We're done with that part. So right here we're going to start looking for the factors of 9. So that's 3 and 3. And we're not going to find the greatest common factor just yet. I'm just trying to break each of these terms down. And the x next to the 9, that's going to be an x. So now we look at both of these set of numbers and variables, and we find out which ones do they have in common. So we have a 3 and a 3. We have an x and an x. So the greatest common factor in between these two is 3x. Now let's try figuring out why a 3x would be a factor of 3x squared. So we have 3x squared over 3x. If it's truly a factor, we're not going to end up with a fraction. So the 3's cancel out, and then one of the x's cancel out, so we end up with an x. That's not a fraction. So 3x is a factor of 3x squared. So now let's look at the 9x. So 9x and then divided by 3x. Now 9 divided by 3, that's going to be 3. X divided by x just cancels out. So we end up with a whole number right here. And it's not a fraction, so we're good. So check and check. Alright, so now let's look at this problem. It has more variables with it. So I'm going to break this 15 down into its factors. So we have 3 and 5. And then I'm going to break this x down into its factors. We got x and x. And this y just stays y because the only other factor is 1 and we don't include it. So now we have 25 here, 25. That's 5 times 5. Gives me 25. That's its lowest factor. There's no more. We have this x by itself, and then we have a y that has 2 factors. So that's y and y. So now we look at what do these two have in common. So they both have a 5, they both have an x, and they both have a y. So that means that our greatest common factor is going to be 5 times x times y. So again, you can check by dividing this number by 5xy. So let's do that real quick. So we have 15x squared y, and if we divide it by 5xy, we shouldn't end up with a fraction. So one of the x's cancel out, the y's cancel out, and then 5 divided by 5 is 3, and we have an x left in the numerator, so 3x. So check those. The 5xy is a factor of 15x squared y. So let's look at the next number here and check it. So we got 25xy squared divided by 5xy. 25 divided by 5, that's going to be 5. And the x's cancel out, and then you end up with 1y on the numerator, so 5y. So that is not a fraction, so check, and we are done with that one. So the greatest common factor between these two terms is 5xy. Now, it doesn't have to be just monomials, which is just single. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a y. So this doesn't have to be like a y by itself. It can be like y minus 1. It can be x squared plus 2. As long as you have the same one on both of the terms, they can be considered a greatest common factor. So right here, we're looking at this term. The x is just x, and then you also have this factor, which is the only factor of y minus 1. So now let's look at the other side. We have a y, we don't have any other factors, but we also have a y minus 1. So then we try to find out, what do these two have in common? Well, they both have y minus 1 in common. So the greatest common factor is going to be y minus 1. That's it.